I'm very happy to be back in the NFDI for Chem, where I had the pleasure to work right from the beginning, and then the first 5 years in the phase 1. I think we could have 2 parts. The second part will be a service part, like Sonja already says. So bring up all your questions and contributions you ever had, and then I'm happy to receive it and to discuss it. Now in the first part, I would like to share with you some observations. Let's say the core issues we had in the first 5 years of NFDI for Chem, the first phase up to last year. Here you see a bit the items I have prepared. The first would be that here you see in a word bubble actually what intellectual property is or what intellectual property is not. So there is no general protection, like a general ownership of data or of findings or of know-how. This does not exist. Instead of such an idea, intellectual property consists of pretty diverse, very specified legal fields. You see here, for instance, things like patent law that can become interesting in our context here when you deal next to pharmacy, for instance. But for instance, in general, patent law is mainly for engineers. Then you have completely other fields of IP like protection, legal protection for design. It is more aesthetic, creative legal protection, and so on. So you have no general protection, legal protection for data, for research data. And I think this is also one of the big misunderstandings. When you look on the left side, by the way, this word bubble is from the German Research Association, DFG. You see as a bit bigger bubble copyright law, Urheberrecht, including also some other protection laws called verwandte Schutzrechte. And I think in research data management, in a lot of application cases, this is the first step to look for copyright law, and this is what we will do now. So first finding to take away when you want, people, there is no general ownership for research data. This is not IP law. So the second idea that I want to share is a very basic idea of copyright law. And you see in brackets, this is at least our understanding here in Europe and in Germany. Copyright law protects in particular works. This is the general common standard in the EU. And of course, as Werke, also well known here in Germany. So copyright law does not protect everything, or findings, know-how, facts. It is specified protection for works. You see down on the slide something we also worked on closer in the last years in NFDI for Chem, the so-called database protection. So this is a special problem that, by the way, only exists in the EU. So for instance, in other regions of this world, like for instance in the US, the colleagues or the law there does not know such a database law, and there the database in total is protected. So the single research data or the single research data sets are still free, but the database in total can be protected, and this is something we discussed with our hosts and partners in NFDI for Chem that hosts data repositories, because they might have this database law. For example, the owner of this database law is the institution, like for instance, a university. But this is a special problem we can discuss later when you want. So, to make it short, copyright law protects only and in particular works, in German, Werke. So this was one of our core works in NFDI for Chem. You see here a typical data set we have taken out from our Karlsruhe colleagues at KIT out of Chemotion. And when you go on, then in the end of this legal analysis, the result was that what you see here as the data set out of Chemotion is public domain. So this is maybe the most important finding we had now, in particular for NFDI for Chem, such a typical, therefore I introduced it with our data sets, such a typical data set here out of Chemotion is public domain. So there is no copyright protection. It is public domain. You find here on the right-hand side the reference. There is an article, where you find the details of this legal analysis. I guess most of you are familiar with Creative Commons. Creative Commons licenses are well-established free license frame with, for instance, the advantage that it's international, for international use elaborated, and it's also machine readable. And one of the main advantages is also that it's well standardized. So you know this for Creative Commons conditions. The obligatory basic one is attribution. This is also for us in science, of course, most important. So you see the small figure with BY, CC BY. Then you have the second optional license condition, share alike. Maybe you know it also from, for instance, Wikipedia. So those are the real open science compliant to Creative Commons licensing options. And then you have two further ones, non-commercial NC, where you can say, I only want to allow non-commercial uses, and you can add the optional condition of non-derivative, so the uses may not change your work. This is then here in this yellow area where we are not compliant anymore, for instance, with the Berlin Declaration of Open Access, but it's still in a certain way accessible and also reusable. And now the main point is, after all this small repetition of the details we know from all types of text and article publications, is licenses and free licenses like the Creative Commons ones are for copyright protected materials only. Creative Commons licenses are only and in particular for copyright protected materials. So as we learned some few moments ago, very most of our research data in chemistry are public domain. So they are not protected by copyright. And so please, Creative Commons, the licenses we know from Creative Commons are not made for our research data in for chemistry. The recommendation would be to label our data with the public domain mark. You see it here right at the top. This is also a symbol and an icon, also machine readable. Yeah, you can also put it in metadata fields, yeah, and in repository. And then this public domain mark does not create actually any new legal implication. It only clarifies, it states out that this content, like for instance our research data set, is public domain. It's not protected by copyright, and then the people can reuse it. You see here a bit the hints. When you look in the RDM landscape, you see often data that are licensed with Creative Commons, although it's actually not possible. What are the consequences? Those Creative Commons licenses are not valid. Yeah. So meaning you cannot say afterwards when you label your research data set that is not copyright protected with CC BY, for instance, yeah, then you cannot later on enforce the attribution, for instance. Yeah, it's not possible. And then you see the second thinking. I think it's also rising up misunderstandings, and these misunderstandings are not fitting with our general goals like open access or fair principles. Yeah. So yeah, please be careful, and when you have not copyright protected research data, then the correct label would be to put a public domain mark here from Creative Commons. Yeah, there's also machine readable and international acknowledged. When you are interested of the details, yeah, or when you have discussions with your legal experts at your university or wherever that maybe are not yet familiar with this structure of Creative Commons, then our research team led by Professor Franziska Böhm, together with some few other experts, have just launched last year for the very first time a commentary in particular to the Creative Commons licenses. There you can find the legal backup and the articles. It's also available open access. You see it here on the left-hand side. So I know when you are talking to the researchers, yeah, these findings, yeah, our research data are not protected at all, and you should not license it with the licenses you are familiar so far. This might sound like an alien. So therefore, I brought in here a bit aliens, and of course, this is something I know we are working a lot in NFDI in general. Also here, Sonja and others just since a lot of time in EduTrain section and in other things. This needs to be transported and communicated. Yeah, and of course, it's also special for chemistry and probably for other natural sciences, while in humanities, where you deal with texts or with music or with films, yeah, of course you have a completely different legal frame. So maybe you are a bit disappointed now that there is no copyright available for most of our research data, and at all there's a very fragmentary framework in terms of intellectual property. So you see here my first scientific contribution 10 years ago already. Then you see when copyright is not available and when also privacy law is not so important, then you have other options to foster legal certainty or clarity. Only to give you some examples, of course, you can look in labor law whether a university or another research organization can put clauses in the labor contracts with scientific staff about who may use research data. Or I already told you, when you look on the right side, patent law, when you work next to a pharmacy, for instance, whether your research findings could be applicable for patent law. And of course, we have the general option of making contractual agreements, yeah. In particular, also in these bigger research projects with partners also from that are not in academia. Yeah. Another very interesting thing is policy. I know a lot of us are working on RDM policies, yeah, bringing there a lot of expertise also from infrastructure point of view and from RDM services. And of course, policies are in the first moment only soft law, yeah, but often they are also becoming legal binding. Yeah. So don't be disappointed when there is no copyright law or protection, and there's also no privacy law for the typical chemistry research data. There are other instruments, legal instruments that you can use. So this is actually my strong recommendation, to put more attention to the good scientific practice. My sons do like trains, so I also do like trains, yeah. And in general, they bring the people ahead, hopefully often in a fast way. And as we all know, in 2019, the German Research Foundation Association, DFG, has launched a new codex guidelines for safeguarding good research practice. And pretty interesting is that the provisions for research data are more, and they are more detailed. So that's really 2 steps ahead. And the second message is, in general, you have a strong ethical point of view when you talk about good research practice. However, now it became also legally binding. So the codex itself is not legally binding. However, you know, all universities and research organizations in Germany had to transform the codex provisions into binding scientific law not later than 2023. So when you are at your home research organization, at your university, you will find a so-called Satzung for gute wissenschaftliche Praxis, and this is for the university staff or for the staff of the other institution like Max Planck Institute or we here at Leibniz Institute. It's really legally binding, and it has also consequences when you are not following this good scientific practice provisions. So you see here some previews of my own core research. For instance, here I want to show how in a university these legally binding provisions are implemented. And you see, for instance, that you have this general Universitätssatzung that all 84 universities in Germany have transformed now in a new Satzung. until 2023. But then you have also a lot of other legal binding documents, like Promotionsordnung, Habilitationsordnung, Studiengangsordnung, and so on. And I want to underline this as, of course, when you think about disciplinary legal framework, for chemists, of course, on the faculty level, yeah, or on institutes levels, yeah, here you can put in RDM provisions that are in particular fitting for chemistry research. Yeah, so you must not follow one size fits all for a very big university. Yeah, you can then go more bottom up for a research group, for an institute, for a faculty. In my view, the provisions of this new good scientific practice is really rich. You see here, in particular, in the three columns on the mid and right-hand side, pretty interesting constellations where you have concrete provisions that are, let's say, made by the science itself, yeah, so made by our colleagues that are engaged in the DFG, but then also that are engaged in the university committees, in the faculty committees, yeah. And you see those are really the concrete questions we have, yeah, and it also rises up here with conflicts. Only one example for a bit closer look is this very fundamental question: who is the copyright holder or who is the data author? And here you see compared the regulation of copyright law that I just mentioned at the beginning, that copyright law protects works and there is no further deep science impact. And when you compare this provision out of the copyright law to the good scientific praxis, I have put here in the mid column, then you see it's a complete different, I would even say mindset, because there you are author according to scientific standards when you have brought out a relevant scientific contribution. Yeah, and this applies also in the same way for data, like it applies for articles, texts, and also for software. Yeah, so yeah, as a scientist myself, I would say those provisions and rules of the good scientific practice are also my favorite ones compared to this that are standardized for the entire copyright. We are coming to the end. Some conclusions of this of our work in this 5 years of NFDI for Chem first phase, and maybe the challenges that are still there. The first point is a very general one. I would say, of course, there are challenges that all researchers and all research infrastructures are faced with. And there it makes sense to work on common legal solutions. Yeah, this is, for instance, what we do in NFDI ELSA. So the section where people from almost all consortia are coming for ethical, social, and legal aspects. But however, in particular, when you look at these two core issues, as a copyright and licensing protection, and also privacy law for the research data, then NFDI for Chem, together with other natural sciences, have completely different challenges to, for instance, the humanities. So, second point, we need to deal with this legal status quo in the training and in making RDM, bringing it in the scientific everyday life. Third, I have said that I'm convinced that we can come ahead with the good scientific practice. It's now very elaborated for research data. It's made by our own. We can figure it out also focused on the single disciplinaries, and also it has potential for international standards. In my opinion, next point, we have released a lot of legal information materials in the last years. This applies for NFDI, but this applies also for the initiatives, for instance, of our federal states here in Germany. Yeah, also on the university levels, for instance. And I would be excited when we could have a project or anything that makes this visible. Yeah, does a quality securing process. So my impression is we do not have a lake of legal information. It's maybe rather a lake of visibility and consolidation. NFDI for Chem is already in the second phase, and some of us already think about the time after the second phase. So I think nobody is sure how, for instance, how the work of the sections will be continued, or what other follow-up there might be implemented. Yeah. And then the last point is a very current one. I mentioned before, for instance, the Open Access Declaration that now is more than 25 years old. Yeah. And actually, so far, we always said that you may use all research findings for any legal purpose. And in compliance to these declarations, yeah, we also recommended, for instance, the Creative Commons BY license for articles. Yeah. But now, as you hear, there are a lot of initiatives that rethink whether we must adapt our open access, our open science understanding, maybe also the FAIR principles for this artificial intelligence and other big data applications. Yeah? And of course, this needs then also transformation in the licenses or in the contractual agreements. Thank you so much for your attention.